Hello, welcome to Talking Logistics, where we have conversations with thought leaders and newsmakers in the supply chain logistics industry. And, today it's just going to be me talking about my supply chain logistics predictions for 2015. Hopefully you had the chance to read the blog post that we published last week where I kind of detailed them. And if you haven't, perhaps after the show you can go ahead and read that. And I figured today I'll just take a little bit of time to just go over them, provide a little bit of more color on those predictions, why I chose them, and kind of, be able to answer any questions that you might have or comments that you may have about those predictions. So with that, if you are joining us today as a visitor and you do want to ask a question or post a comment, you will have to sign up first before you're able to do so. And certainly, you can post a question throughout via the question feature or via the chat feature. And after I go through this, if there's some good and appropriate questions or comments, I'll address them at the end. Why 6 predictions, right? And the short answer is that 100 predictions would just be too long to write about or to talk about. And I think that's the incredible thing about the supply chain logistics field, and the thing that makes it fun and interesting is that literally there could be 100 different things that we could be talking about in terms of what could be happening next year. And really what I wanted to do is try to focus in on, just a finite number that perhaps I haven't talked about as much in the past or written about as much in the past. So I think things that just kind of bubbled up to the top for me that I thought would be interesting to kind of emphasize again for the coming year. If you look back at kind of the predictions I made for 2013 and 2014, and I listed those in the blog post last week. A lot of those trends, a lot of those predictions are really going to continue into 2015 and beyond. So from a technology standpoint, things such as cloud, mobile technology, business intelligence and analytics, all those things for sure are going to continue to have an impact on the technology side in terms of the software vendors and technology providers, and kind of enhancing their capabilities in those areas. And certainly in the way the companies are going to be leveraging those capabilities and those technologies to, improve their business processes, for productivity reasons, for visibility reasons, so on and so forth. So, again, cloud, mobile, BI, big data, analytics, all those things, I decided not to kind of write too much about it because I think those are the things that are going to continue to evolve and improve in the coming year and the years beyond that. Certainly when you think about regulations, things like hours of service, which there was a lot of conversation about hours of service at the beginning of the year, and just when you thought the book was closed on that topic, just last week, with the spending bill, there was an amendment included in that to suspend the 34-hour restart rule, at least till September of 2015. So certainly we're going to see hours of service again be part of the conversation in the transportation circles, in 2015. And when you think about transportation funding, which is another topic that I wrote about, and there was a lot of discussion about this year, that's coming up again in the spring here with the new Congress. If you look at past history, it's easy to predict that more than likely this Congress will also kick the can on putting together a long-term solution, and when the time comes in, I believe it's in March or April timeframe, they'll just come up with another short-term solution. But again, talking about the funding of the transportation infrastructure, that's going to be something that's going to be talked about next year as well. Driver shortage and all sorts of other industry-related topics. Those are all going to be things that are from a regulatory standpoint are going to continue to drive conversation, and you're going to see continued developments in those areas. And then finally, when I look back at 2014, and I've said this a few times this year, I think really this year we can look back and say this was the year that delivery really became or started to become a competitive differentiator, and a tool for companies to really drive additional value to their customers, to really differentiate themselves from the competition. So, whereas a few years ago, all the rage was free delivery, then we kind of migrated to next day delivery. And today we're talking about, and seeing a lot of experimentation taking place with same day delivery. and whether it's using couriers to enable that, whether it's the likes of Uber and kind of expanding their value proposition and their business model to kind of experiment with same-day delivery, or even at the extreme, the use of drones with Amazon and Google and DHL and even UPS and others kind of working on that, and the regulations that are going to be important to make that a reality. Those are all going to be things that we're going to continue to see development in 2015 and in the years ahead. So again, I didn't want to focus too much on those types of things because I think those things, me personally, I cover them a lot over the past year or two, and rather than emphasize those things, I decided to emphasize, some things again that either I see as being relatively new or things that I think it's worth underscoring yet again. So with that, let me go quickly go through my 6 predictions here, and like I said in the written post, I'll start with my most audacious one this year, and that is that Google will acquire a third-party logistics company or a logistics software vendor in 2015. Now, this prediction was kind of inspired, if you will, by a number of different trends taking place in the industry. First is the Amazon effect. Certainly this past year, and over the past 2 or 3 years, no company has kind of garnered so much attention and driven so much innovation, if you will, or kind of disrupted so many different industries than Amazon has. And they're really the company that many companies, many of the peers and competitors, and even those outside the direct sphere of influence, are looking to, kind of when Amazon speaks, everyone listens. And certainly Google is one of those companies that, number one, feels threatened by Amazon, and particularly in the search space, because if you read some of the recent news articles out there, more and more people, when they're starting a search, particularly for buying a product, rather than typing in and starting their search process on Google, they're actually starting their search process on Amazon. And we've seen, Google and Amazon try to outmaneuver each other in a number of different fronts over the past couple of years, including, logistics-related areas such as same-day delivery, in terms of the same-day delivery services that each have been experimenting with and rolling out over the past couple of years, as well as even with drones and drone development. So I think that's gonna continue. When I published a post last week, I think one of the more common comments that I've received is, well, it kind of makes sense for Amazon to invest in logistics because they're an e-commerce provider, so they've had to build that infrastructure to fulfill their orders. It's part of their core business, and Google doesn't sell any products, right? So it kind of doesn't make any sense or as much sense for them to develop a logistics infrastructure. What I would say there is that I think Google, as well as Facebook and even Twitter, I think they're coming at this from different starting points for sure. But I think they're all migrating toward a common endpoint, if you will, and that is this convergence that's happening in the marketplace between social networking, e-commerce, and even search, right? So if you've seen what's happened over the past year, Facebook and Twitter, have kind of moved beyond kind of being just an advertising platform and are now trying to facilitate e-commerce. Right, so both Facebook and Twitter have been experimenting with a buy now button within their user interfaces, and I think that's a first step. And I wrote a post earlier this year, kind of making the point that Facebook and Twitter really need to move beyond just the buy button and ultimately need to start addressing some logistics capabilities, much like already Google has done that, right, in terms of their same-day delivery services and what they're doing there. And just yesterday in the Wall Street Journal, there was an article about Google in terms of putting a buy button, right, and being able to facilitate e-commerce transactions straight from Google, right? So instead of providing a link to a retailer's website to facilitate, to execute that buy process, Google is really looking to really keep consumers engaged within their website and be able to enable the buy feature within the Google platform, the Google environment. So my thinking is that ultimately, because these things are going to converge, social networking, e-commerce, and even search, And while the buy button and the search, it's all really what I view as the front end of this process, ultimately to really provide the full value proposition, they're going to ultimately have to focus in one degree or another on the back end of that transaction, which is really logistics, right? And the fulfillment and getting that product, to the end customer. And, I think, when I say 3PL, I think a lot of folks think about, very asset heavy, provider. But the reality is that what is a 3PL today? And that's something that I've talked about a lot this year. And we're seeing a lot of convergence take place in that area. So what I would say is when I say 3PL, I don't necessarily mean Google buying someone like a UPS or buying someone that's got, a ton of trucks or a ton of warehouses. The reality is that today the definition of a 3PL is really someone that combines the right mix of technology and services, to provide value to the customers. And here I think there's a big opportunity for Google to provide technology as well as some level of logistics services to customers out there. And those customers could be, in my opinion, small and mid-sized businesses that are relatively new to e-commerce, may not have the logistics fulfillment capabilities in-house, or may not be as sophisticated as something that perhaps a Google can provide. So I think that's kind of where I was coming from when I made that prediction. And again, it's really underpinned by the Amazon effect and underpinned by the fact that I see social networking, e-commerce, and even search, coming together and converging. And then what is that going to mean, right? And I think ultimately when you think about that, it's going to be beyond, you got to think beyond the buy button, and ultimately Google as well as Facebook and Twitter and those that are coming at it from the social networking and search side are going to need to think about e-commerce. Are going to need to think about logistics within the realm of e-commerce. So anyway, that was my most audacious prediction for next year. So let me move on to my next prediction, which is that supply chain network design. Well, let me go ahead and put it up on the screen first. Let me take this one off the air. Okay, the supply chain design will become a continuous business process. When you look at supply chain network design, this has been a business process that really, for most companies, was a once-a-year exercise, or an exercise that they took, whenever some major change happened within their supply chain, such as an acquisition. And I really kind of equate it to, in many cases, the way companies have historically treated supply chain risk management. So supply chain risk management was also something that companies really did it on an ad hoc basis, right? So some kind of big disruption occurred in the supply chain, whether it was weather-related or quality-related, strike-related, so on and so forth. And really what companies historically did was, they put an all-hands-on-deck meeting, they figured out what caused the problem, come up with some changes in terms of preventing it in the future. Then they would put all that in a binder, put it up on the shelf and really not think about it, not operationalize it, right? Until the next disruption would occur. And in many ways, supply chain design, which is linked with the risk management, kind of was operating in a similar type of way. It was something that has till date has not been operationalized. It's something that's been done in a more ad hoc, as needed, type of basis. But what you're seeing now with best-in-class companies is because there is so much rapid change taking place in their supply chains, whether it's from competitive threats, changes in regulations, more stringent customer requirements. Companies are put in a situation and really in a need to really start asking a lot more what-if questions, right? And really looking at ways to continuously tweak and change their supply chains in response to these fast-changing forces. What we're seeing now is kind of this movement away from it being more like kind of a strategic, tactical, or being viewed only that way, to being more operationalized. And the reality is when a lot of people think about supply chain design, they think about network design, right? And with network design, historically, you're talking about, where should we open up new distribution centers or set up our manufacturing facilities? Where should we source product from? And granted, those types of analysis, those types of decisions, a lot of times there's capital investment involved that's required. There's a lot of change management that's involved. They're really disruptive changes that have to take place. So naturally, those types of things are not going to be, undertaken every 6 months or every year, maybe not even every 2 or 3 years. So those types of things are still going to be important, those types of analysis. But the reality is when we talk about supply chain design, there are a lot of other types of analysis that what I would view as more what if type of analysis that companies definitely need to be doing on a more frequent basis. So, for example, one of the things I wrote about yesterday on the blog was about West Coast ports and the delays that companies are experiencing there, and the fact that some shippers are already looking up and importing product through Canadian ports. So that's a perfect example of a supply chain design analysis that could be done on a more frequent basis, right? What if we imported, shifted a certain percentage of our imports away from Long Beach and LA and started moving it through Vancouver and some of the other ports, right? What would that do to lead times? What would that do to cost? What impact would that have in terms of how we would flow product, right? So that's one type of analysis. Another type might be around how you would flow product, right? Through which channels, right? What if we did more direct-to-store shipments versus moving things through distribution centers or through cross-docks? Kind of what impact would that have on lead time? What impact would that have on our inventory positions? What if we shifted a certain percentage of our transportation volume to intermodal as opposed to truckload, right? Again, you can think of a whole host of different types of what-if questions. And really, it's really undertaking that type of analysis and seeing what the implications are. And those are all things that could potentially be operationalized much more quickly, and really start realizing the benefits of those changes, in a more real-time environment, if you will, than, again, the traditional thinking of what supply chain network design is, which is really, opening up new distribution centers or changing, where you're manufacturing and so on and so forth. So I think that there's an element of really thinking differently about what supply chain design is and what type of analysis you can do. And then finally, I think is the recognition that, the tools that companies use for supply chain design, historically they were, relatively speaking, very difficult to learn and difficult to use. You really needed to be a power user. In many cases, you needed a higher level degree in operations research, or really understand the math behind those. And certainly those skills are still important. But many of the technology providers today are really making these tools much easier to use, much easier to learn, much more intuitive. The ability to create these models and these simulations, be able to do that on a more rapid basis, be able to reuse, existing models, so on and so forth. So I think the usability of these tools has improved significantly, as well as the affordability. And I think what's going to end up happening as a result is, a lot of companies, their traditional approach to supply chain design has been to kind of create a center of excellence, and that's really where you kind of put in your core design, supply chain planners and designers, and it was kind of a shared service across the enterprise. I think what we're going to see now is those skills, those tools being much more decentralized and really in the hands of a greater number of people in different functional groups to be able to, again, do these types of analysis on a more day-to-day or at least more frequent basis that has been done in the past. So again, that was my second prediction: supply chain design becoming more of a continuous business process as opposed to a once a year engagement or doing things on a project basis. So moving on to my third prediction. So let me go ahead and put that up on the screen. Is that 3PLs and software vendors are going to focus more on the small and mid-sized business market, as well as the energy and the process industries. I generally refer to the SMB market as the road less traveled for growth for both 3PLs and software vendors. And there's a lot of, reasons why 3PLs and software vendors haven't focused on the SMB market. And one of the key reasons has been cost of sales, right? So it costs just as much to try to sell a small company, a small customer, as it does to sell a tier one company. And the tier one company, usually the business opportunity, the revenue opportunity is much greater. So all the resources were really focused on, selling that top customer. But, if you look at, today, and this has been happening for quite some time, and I think, this is one of those predictions that, certainly could have been made 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago, right? Because the reality is that top tier market is becoming much more competitive, much more saturated, but 3PLs and software vendors have really had a tough time cracking that nut in terms of how to approach the SMB market. I think they're going to do that with renewed focus in 2015 and beyond, because there are a new set of competitors that are entering the market. Like I mentioned earlier, this convergence that's happening between 3PLs, software vendors, and consultants. So you're seeing a lot of new competitors out there that are providing much more cost-effective, much more flexible, faster to deploy solutions. And I think that is opening the door, to the SMB market. And again, certainly cloud has been one of those areas that, in recent years has also, particularly on the technology front, has been one of the hurdles that has been overcome because of cloud in terms of the deployment model and the pricing models and all that from the technology standpoint. So again, I think we're going to see more and more 3PLs and technology vendors really take another look at the SMB market, look at ways of really configuring their business model and leverage some of these technology tools from a sales standpoint to lower that cost of sales, to really go out and penetrate that market much more aggressively than they have in the past. I think a similar thing is going to happen from a vertical industry, standpoint. When you look at what I call the usual suspects, right? The industries that both 3PLs and software vendors have historically focused on. Those are automotive, high tech, retail, CPG. Again, still opportunities in those industries, particularly in retail. There's a lot going on in retail with all the buzz around omni-channel fulfillment and with e-commerce playing a bigger role in supply chains. So that's not to say that companies are going to, wholesale turn away from those, those traditional industries. But the reality is that there's a lot of competition in that area. And the reality is that there's a lot of untapped market opportunity and the opportunity to really, win a significant market share by focusing on what I call underserved and underpenetrated industries. And one of those that's really getting a lot of attention today is oil and gas. Obviously, a lot of buzz around the oil and gas industry with shale, what's happening on the shale and fracking and all that. And the reality is, when you look at that supply chain, there's a lot of room for opportunity, to improve, particularly in the upstream, side. And I think savvy 3PLs, and we're seeing that today, savvy 3PLs and even technology companies are recognizing that and really coming in to help educate that market, help provide them with the tools and the services to move them up the, maturity curve when it comes to, supply chain logistics. And you're seeing a similar thing in the process industries with a particular emphasis on chemicals. So again, I think the traditional paths to growth, whether it's the tier one companies, the usual suspects of industries, mergers and acquisitions, expanding geographically, all those things are going to still be true and valid, and you're going to see 3PLs and software vendors pursue those. But I think that those that are really looking to capture market share, become, get in front of the rest of the industry, be the early front runners, are going to look to the SMB market, are going to look to the energy and process industries to really get a head start on the competition in those areas. And I think we're going to see that more aggressively, moving forward in 2015. So let me move on to my next prediction here, number 4. Let me go ahead and find it and put it up on the screen. So number 4 is that companies are going to transform their decision-making processes and leverage, and as a result, leverage social networking tools, much more aggressively than they have in the past. Again, a lot of buzz over the past few years around big data, business intelligence, analytics, and the need for companies to make smarter decisions faster, and the roles those technologies will play in enabling that. But the sad reality is that, you know, those technologies can only take you so far, and unless companies also transform, you know, the way they make decisions internally. You know, and I wrote about this early this year in the blog, and kind of the example I always give, particularly when I give talks, and I see a lot of shaking heads in the audience, is, you know, you can just think of any situation that often comes up at a company. Maybe there's a big decision that needs to be made in response to a problem or in response to a customer requirement or a competitive threat or something. And ideally that decision needs to be made quickly. But you know what, John, who's the VP, really needs to be part of that conversation, and he's traveling through Asia, you know, for the next 2 weeks. So we really need wait for him to get back to participate in that. You know, Mary, who is another VP responsible for one aspect of that decision, you know, she's also visiting customers overseas, and she's going to be gone for the next 2 or 3 weeks. So we're going to have to wait for her to get back. You know what, our European team, this is going to be important for them, so we need to get them involved as well, so on and so forth. So by the time you get all of the people that's required to you know, kind of provide their input into this, you know, a month has gone by, 6 weeks have gone by, when ideally at most a decision should have been made within a week. And I think, you know, at a high level, that's kind of the challenge that many companies have, and the question that they're asking themselves is, how do we expedite that decision-making process, right? How do we, you know, communicate and collaborate in a much more efficient and scalable way, and really walk the talk on what's been talked about for many years, you know, since I, you know, was a young professional and started my career back in the early 90s, right? Which is empowering teams and empowering individuals, right? How do we, you know, actually walk the talk on that? And I think that's where, you know, companies that are able to transform the decision-making processes and be able to, you know, leverage not only the technology, but really empower their teams, empower individuals to make, you know, decisions much more quickly, much more scalably, I think are going to be ahead of the game. And that's where social networking technologies come in. You know, what I tell folks is, you know, view social networking, you know, think beyond Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter. You know, view social networking technologies as another communication, collaboration tool in your communication toolbox, right? Beyond email, beyond phone calls, beyond all hands on deck meetings. Because in many cases, particularly when you have to get many people involved in a decision where not only it's people within your own company across functional groups, but external trading partners, people across different, you know, geographic regions. Social networking is proven to be kind of the ideal tool to have that type of communication and collaboration in a much more scalable and effective manner. And I think you know, you see already a lot of good case studies out there of how companies are leveraging, you know, social networking to really supercharge the way they communicate and collaborate, and really help facilitate and really condense the time to decision, you know, much more quickly. Those are still relying on, you know, sending emails around to CC's list of, you know, 50 people with attachments going back and forth. I mean, if that's kind of the way you're communicating, collaborating today, you know, you're going to be significantly behind the curve and at a disadvantage moving forward, because, you know, we all know that that's just not very effective. It's not very scalable, and really it's misaligned with the need for companies to really make smarter decisions faster. So that's my prediction there. In terms of companies really transforming the decision-making processes and leveraging social networking technologies, you know, to enable that. My next prediction is that 3PLs and customers will transform the way they work together, and that is, you know, take a more vested approach. Now, this is probably one that I probably have written about a lot in past years. The one that I kind of keep going back to. And the one that I still remain, you know, confident that, you know, this will be the year that, you know, we'll see more action move in this direction. And here's the bottom line. You know, when you see, again, going back to the rapid pace of change that companies are experiencing, when you look at just the intense competition out there, not only that 3PLs are facing, but also the customers are facing in terms of the things that they need to get, the things that they need to do to really continue to innovate, continue to meet their service, the customer requirements, so on and so forth. It's becoming clearer to companies that the old way of working is just not working. It's just not aligned with what companies need to do to really be leaders, moving forward. So kind of the traditional view of, a 3PL is a supplier and I am a buyer as opposed to a business partner. The traditional, I'm the 800-pound gorilla, right? And I'm going to dictate terms and you're going to do things my way. And and you're going to bear all the risk and all the cost and I'm going to bear all the benefits. I mean, those are all outdated and ways of working together, ways of managing business relationships. I know a few weeks ago I commented about Apple and GT Advanced Technologies and what happened with that relationship. There was just some news earlier this week about some research that was done kind of highlighting how, small suppliers are being quote unquote bullied out there by their bigger business partners. And again, I think that's just the old way of thinking, old way of working together. And I think, and I believe, and I know based on some of the early case studies out there, that those companies that can move away from that type of old way of thinking, old way of working, and really think about working together, less from a supplier-customer type of framework, but more from a business partner, strategic business partner standpoint, where you're developing a shared vision statement that's more long-term focused, where there's much more equitable sharing of risks and rewards. I think those are the ones that are really going to open up a great opportunity for innovation, and you're going to really leapfrog, the types of outcomes that are going to be achievable under that type of framework versus, the traditional framework. And again, I always get the question, certainly I'm not advocating that every 3PL customer relationship has to be strategic, has to be vested, has to be a business partnership. There are many cases where a purely tactical, commodity, quote unquote commodity type of transaction is the right approach. But I think every manufacturer, every retailer out there knows who their strategic 3PLs are. Every 3PL knows who their strategic customers are. And it's those, handful of relationships that each party has that it's worth revisiting again and say, are we working as effectively as possible? Is it time to really take a step back and see how we can kind of view this from a different lens and put together a business relationship and a governance structure and a shared vision statement that's going to, get us both to where we want to be, not only this year or 1 or 2 or 3 years, but really where we want to be in 5, 10 years from now. And I think those companies that really take that perspective and put the pieces in place to make that happen. And it's not easy. I mean, as I've commented before, it's not easy to do that. It's a lot of change management. Again, taking on risk and costs and things like that is something that, particularly for the bigger player in the relationship, is something that you got to kind of move away from the old way of doing things to get there. But I think once you get past that, if you're able to get past that, I think based on what the success stories out there to date, I think great things are in store. And then finally, my last prediction is probably the one that's a little bit, probably the fuzziest, but it's that the great unlearning begins, and we're going to see that starting to happen in 2015. So what do I mean by that? The great unlearning begins. What I mean by that is, and it's really driven by cloud computing, right? So I mentioned early on, cloud computing is going to continue to have an impact on the industry from a variety of different angles. And what struck me, this year, particularly when I talked to technology companies, is the fact that computing power, processing time, is virtually infinite today. Not quite infinite, but very close to infinite. So things that just a short few years ago, types of optimizations or analysis that were either impossible because the algorithms weren't developed or the technology just couldn't handle it, or impractical because to do that type of analysis in that scale, that scope, would have taken, 12 hours to run or 24 hours to run, and you're trying to do this on an operational basis. So you just really, couldn't do it because it just made no sense. Today, because of cloud computing and the fact that you can just connect to something like an Amazon cloud, and you can have, as many processors and servers at your disposal for a finite amount of time to create some of this analysis. The reality is that things that were impossible and practical years ago are possible and practical today, at least from a technology standpoint. So I think this one really is about companies really taking a step back and saying, hey, you know what? Let's question the way we're currently managing our processes, the way we've set up things, because that was probably set up and done based on the constraints that we faced, a few years ago, whether constraints on computing power, constraints on what our 3PLs and our technology partners can do, so on and so forth. And it's really about, do those constraints still exist? And is there a way now to, do some higher level, more integrated analysis, more integrated processing than we've done in the past? And I think that process is going to begin. And I think certainly technology companies are going to have to take a lead on that in terms of really educating customers in terms of what's possible today that maybe wasn't possible a few years ago. And I think 3PLs, because they're going to play a role here as well, are going to also have to become educating themselves on this and also play a role in the education process in terms of their customers and saying, hey, you know what, here's an opportunity now that we couldn't do this in the past, but now we can do today because of the state of the technology today, the capabilities that we have that we can bring to the table. So again, the Great Unlearning begins, and I think it's going to be an ongoing process. This is not something that's going to happen overnight. Just like anything else, it's going to be a lot of change management that's going to be involved. But I think we'll start to see case studies out there of companies really taking a differentiated approaches to managing their supply chains, in ways that are new and unique and different. And a lot of that is going to be enabled by, again, cloud computing and these great advancements that are taking place in technology, and companies overcoming the, hey, this is the way we've always done things, and kind of question that and say, well, what can we do today? And is there a better way of doing it? And can we do it, right? So again, those were my 6 predictions, not a comprehensive list. My main goal really was to, generate some thoughtful conversations and some ideas out there, around these things. And just like I said at the beginning, I think what's really fun and interesting about this industry is that there is so much going on, and there's never a dull moment. And I think that whatever happens in 2015, I think it's going to be, advancements in a variety of different areas. I think there's going to be some great surprises, things that none of us would have foreseen. And I think some of these things that I've talked about and other folks that are talking about out there, we're going to continue to see advance and play a bigger and bigger role in the industry. So, we didn't get any questions live today, but, if you are watching this on demand, I invite you to, post a question or a comment at talkinglogistics.com. So find the episode there. And if you post a question or comment there, I'll be more than happy to respond via that medium. And if you haven't had a chance to read through my predictions, and I also link to a variety of other posts that we've written and published on Talking Logistics this year related to these predictions, I encourage you to visit the website, talkinglogistics.com, find the post, which is Google will acquire 3PL and other supply chain logistics predictions for 2015. And again, you can post a question or comment on that post as well. So with that, thank you very much for joining us today, and certainly look forward to seeing you in a future episode of Talking Logistics. Have a great day.